We often talk about cyber threats, the bad actors, the ransomware, the nation-state hackers trying to steal your data.
Right, the external threats.
Exactly. But today, we're diving into something fundamentally different. It's this massive, coordinated, and often quiet global effort that, intentionally or not, is building a new digital architecture.
An architecture designed to, well, eliminate anonymity and fundamentally redefine what privacy even means online.
That really is the core theme of the sources we've looked at, isn't it?
Yeah.
This isn't just one bad bill in one country.
Not at all. We are tracking a convergence. You see new laws across, what, 4 continents? Australia, the US, the UK, the EU, all pushing, maybe unknowingly sometimes, toward the same outcome.
And some critics are calling this legislative push the establishment of a global digital panopticon, a pretty stark term.
It is. It captures the feeling of constant potential observation.
Okay, so let's establish our mission for this deep dive. We're analyzing the sources that track really 3 key fronts in this silent war for your digital identity. First, the massive rise of mandatory age verification and these global ID systems.
Right, the who are you part.
Second, the global battle governments are fighting to break end-to-end encryption, essentially trying to monitor private communication.
The what are you saying part?
And third, this quieter, often outsourced content control, the kind carried out by, say, financial institutions and powerful regulatory bodies.
Yeah, the what can you see or do part, often controlled indirectly. And navigating this landscape, it requires constant awareness of all these regulatory shifts, the compliance burdens.
Sounds exhausting just thinking about it.
It is for businesses. We pull crucial insights into these complex global policy frameworks, these cross-border legislative maneuvers from expert resources. For instance, the detailed analysis available on the Compliance Hub Wiki is invaluable here.
Right. Staying current on these compliance standards is probably the only way organizations can hope to manage this rapid legislative change.
Absolutely. It's moving fast.
So let's jump right in. Okay, the most immediate and I'd say staggering global shift we are tracking is this move away from the optional anonymous internet many of us grew up with,
Yeah, that baseline assumption is changing.
towards a system of mandatory, verified identity access. And this isn't just about signing into Facebook anymore, is it?
No, not at all. It's about establishing a permanent, verified identity requirement for digital services that have, historically been public and accessible without needing to prove who you are every single time.
It's a remarkable cultural and technological pivot. We're seeing this global race to implement the most robust age verification systems.
And almost always operating under that politically unassailable banner of child protection, which of course is a valid goal.
Of course.
But what really alarms policy analysts, and you see this in the source material, is the sheer volume of highly sensitive identity data these systems demand, and crucially, the infrastructure needed to hold it securely.
Let's look first at Australia. They've really set an unprecedented global marker here.
They have.
They passed the world's first comprehensive ban on social media for children under 16, passed late 2024, expected to be enforced by, end of 2025?
That's right. And this is a profound shift because it moves beyond the old idea of just needing parental supervision or consent.
It's an absolute ban.
It is. Platforms like TikTok, Instagram, they must deploy robust, systematic age assurance technologies. The goal is to completely exclude an entire segment of the population based on a verified birth date.
Which means these platforms either have to use things like biometric scans, facial age estimation, or integrate directly with existing or maybe even new government ID systems.
Exactly. And the Australian legislation itself kind of reflects this dilemma, this tension.
How so?
Well, the law acknowledges the danger inherent in collecting all this data. It explicitly states that government-issued ID cannot be the only means of verification.
Oh, interesting. Why?
Due to profound long-term privacy concerns, they've even allocated, I think it's $6.5 million for an age assurance technology trial.
So they're basically admitting they don't yet have a system that can meet both the mandatory verification requirement and maintain privacy effectively.
That seems to be the implication, yes. It's a huge technical and ethical challenge. But the privacy risks aren't the only concern the sources raise about Australia's approach.
Right. There's a social impact, too.
Yes. Mental health experts, even elected officials like Senator David Shoebridge, have voiced serious concerns. While protecting children is vital, an absolute ban could dangerously isolate many kids.
Especially those who use social media to find essential support networks.
Precisely. Think about kids in regional communities, the LGBTQIA+ community, Indigenous children. When you remove that digital community, you risk undermining really important protective factors for vulnerable youth. It's a trade-off that, frankly, is rarely acknowledged in the public debate.
That sets the stage perfectly for the U.S. approach.
Mm.
It's different, but you could argue equally invasive.
Yeah.
Here's where the focus on identity verification for everything starts to really hit home for people. Take Texas SB 2420. It's set to take effect in January 2026.
Okay.
This law will require age verification for every single new app download on major platforms. Apple App Store, Google Play.
Okay, every app?
Every app. Think about that for a minute. We are not just talking about pornography or, maybe violent gaming sites.
Right.
We are talking comprehensive identity verification just to download a weather app, a library app, a sports score checker.
Wow. So if you are identified as a minor,
Then every single download and even every in-app purchase will require explicit parent account linkage and approval. Every single time.
that's quite something.
The sources highlight the core critique perfectly, I think. Is the admirable goal of protecting children online worth creating what they call a massive surveillance infrastructure?
An infrastructure that requires ID verification for every single piece of software on your phone.
Yeah. And the follow-on question is critical. Once that system of universal identification is operational, which would fundamentally end anonymous digital existence, what else will government regulators decide that infrastructure should be used for?
That's the slippery slope argument, and it leads directly to the inevitable risk that critics constantly highlight, the privacy nightmare.
Because implementing these global age verification systems requires building massive, centralized identity data honeypots.
Exactly. And as the experts warn repeatedly in the sources, breaches of this sensitive identity information are not hypothetical statistical risks. They frame them as inevitable.
And we have specific, frankly, chilling evidence of that risk already.
We do. The AU10TIX case.
Right. A major identity verification company, AU10TIX, handles checks for global platforms. They were found to have left login credentials exposed.
Exposed for over a year, which allowed access to users' names, dates of birth, nationality, ID numbers, and, critically, images of identity documents, passports, driver's licenses.
That is the absolute ideal trove for highly effective phishing, identity theft, even blackmail operations.
Absolutely devastating potential impact. And this specific failure really underscores why resources that track and document these system vulnerabilities are so critical now.
Especially for businesses relying on these third parties.
Precisely. When high-volume ID verification systems get compromised, the damage is exponential. Anyone running a business or managing systems in this new regulatory environment needs to be acutely aware of whether their third-party contractors have been compromised.
Is that where something like breach.company comes in?
Exactly. This kind of systemic risk is constantly documented by organizations like www.breached.company, which tracks compromised systems and data exposures globally. It's about knowing your risk profile in real time.
And this all feeds into the, frankly, terrifying larger context of the global digital ID push.
It does. Over 100 countries are developing or implementing digital ID systems right now.
And the number of identities already issued is staggering.
Approximately 5 billion digital identities already issued worldwide. When you centralize data on that global scale, the security risk just becomes, well, existential.
Consider the sheer magnitude of India's Aadhaar system, world's largest biometric ID system, right?
Over 1.3 billion users. And they had a major data breach in 2023.
How major?
It involved the leak of 815 million records.
815 million.
Yeah. To put that number in perspective for you, that's more records leaked in one single incident than the entire combined population of Europe.
That's hard to even comprehend.
It shows the scale of the risk. And back in Australia, their Digital ID Act of 2024, while technically voluntary now.
It's becoming increasingly necessary to interact with government services, right?
Exactly. And inevitably, it coincides with the enforcement of these stringent new e-safety content laws. So you're fusing identity with mandatory compliance online. Okay, so if Section 1 showed us the legislative focus on who you are,
Verifying your identity.
then the second major front focuses directly on what you say and how you say it. This is the direct global assault on end-to-end encryption.
Which is pretty much the only technical guarantee of real privacy we have left online.
It really is. And the most dramatic recent battle here, and arguably the most significant recent victory for privacy advocates, was the defeat, or maybe more accurately, the major postponement of the EU's chat control proposal.
Right, CRSOR. the child sexual abuse regulation, officially. Highly controversial.
Extremely. This proposal would have mandated mass scanning of all private chats, photos, cloud storage, regardless of whether the user was suspected of any crime whatsoever, just blanket scanning.
And that vote, set for October 2025, got postponed.
Indefinitely postponed, yes.
No.
After Germany and Luxembourg formed a blocking minority, they essentially stopped it for now.
What was the core mechanism they were fighting?
It's called client-side scanning. And this isn't monitoring after a message is sent. It's a requirement that platforms install a kind of, well, digital fingerprinting software.
Which critics called government spyware.
Rightly so, many argue. Because this software would scan your messages and files before they get encrypted and sent, ensuring the government or the platform itself always has potential access.
So much for end-to-end encryption, then.
Precisely. It fundamentally breaks the model. And the technical consensus against this was overwhelming.
How many experts?
Over 500 cryptographers, the actual people who design and secure these systems, publicly warned the system was, quote, technically infeasible to implement securely.
So not just an ethical objection, a fundamental technical flaw.
Exactly. A structural failure waiting to happen. And the data we have actually supports that technical skepticism perfectly.
From existing scanning systems.
Yeah, the voluntary ones already in place. German police data from 2024 showed that nearly 100,000 private chats, 99,375 to be precise of completely innocent people, were wrongly flagged.
Wrongly flagged. That's a lot of innocent people investigated.
And it was nearly a 10% increase in false positives year over year. Even more concerning, Irish data showed an 80% false positive rate on automated reports.
80%. So the machine spends most of its time looking at innocent people.
You create a surveillance machine that, by its own admission, spends the vast majority of its resources investigating entirely innocent communications. It's incredibly inefficient, besides being invasive.
The technical experts are remarkably blunt on this point in the sources. They insist.
There is no such thing as a backdoor that only the good guys can use. It's a common refrain, but it's true.
Because once you mandate that vulnerability to enable government access,
Every malicious actor on the planet, hackers, organized crime, hostile foreign states, can immediately try to piggyback on it. You compromise global security for everyone.
this is where industry resistance became so important, wasn't it?
Absolutely crucial. Messaging services like Signal, Tutamail, Telegram, they made it crystal clear they would simply exit the EU market entirely rather than compromise their core security standard.
Pull out completely. That's a big threat.
A huge threat. The president of Signal stated plainly, if forced to choose between building a surveillance machine or leaving the market, they would leave. Full stop.
And that principled, non-negotiable stance provided real political leverage.
It did. Privacy advocates could point to it, showing that economic withdrawal was a credible threat, and the ongoing work of organizations, the kind tracked by sites like www.myprivacy.blog, played a major role in coordinating that public and industry opposition needed to achieve the postponement. It shows advocacy can work.
Okay, so the EU measure was stopped, or at least paused. But the legislative sentiment didn't just disappear, did it?
Not at all. It seems to have migrated. Look at Ireland, a major European tech hub.
Right.
Their proposed communications bill seeks to modernize laws that are like 30 years old.
Right.
But its aim is to allow real-time interception of all encrypted platforms.
Oh, what does that include?
And we mean all. WhatsApp, sure, but also gaming consoles, connected vehicles, even satellite networks by the police and the defense forces.
Wow. What's the government's justification?
They point to the rapid technological shift, noting that something like 85% of criminal investigations now rely on electronic evidence, which is understandable.
But there, the technical reality remains the same.
Exactly. As we just established, achieving real-time, comprehensive interception requires fundamentally compromising end-to-end encryption. It introduces that same permanent vulnerability the EU cryptographers warned about, just maybe at a national level first.
And this desire to kill anonymity isn't just a European thing.
Definitely not. Governments globally are actively targeting circumvention tools. VPNs, virtual private networks, are a prime target.
Which are critical for private, secure communication for lots of people.
Journalists, activists, remote workers, anyone on public Wi-Fi. But in Russia, the government is systematically restricting VPN services.
And pushing their own alternative.
Yep, pushing a state-linked domestic app called Max. It lacks end-to-end encryption and explicitly reserves the right in its terms to share all user data with security services. No privacy by design there.
And we're seeing anti-VPN sentiment in the U.S. too.
We are, at the state level. In Wisconsin, there's legislation advancing that would require adult content sites to actively block VPN traffic.
Framed as an aid verification tool, I assume.
Exactly. But critics warn, again, that VPNs are essential tools for so many legitimate purposes. Mandating their blocking creates this technical impossibility that could force blanket restrictions on VPN use much more broadly, impacting secure work and communication globally.
Okay, so we've established the drive to identify you
Section 1.
and the drive to monitor your communication.
Section 2, the encryption wars.
But what happens if governments can't always legislate content control directly? Maybe because of resistance on encryption like we saw in the EU, or perhaps constitutional challenges like the First Amendment in the US. Where does that censorship power migrate?
Well, the sources suggest we're seeing it quietly, but very effectively outsourced.
Outsourced to who?
To financial institutions, primarily, and also embedded within algorithmic compliance rules from powerful regulatory bodies.
This is often called financial censorship, right?
Exactly. And it's this quiet mechanism of content removal that most people just don't see coming. It's not usually a big, noisy legislative battle in Parliament.
It's more bureaucratic or corporate.
Precisely. A decision made in a boardroom based on risk assessment, not necessarily a law passed after public debate.
We saw this play out dramatically in the gaming world recently, didn't we? With Valve, the company behind Steam.
Yes, the huge digital game store. Valve removed nearly 100 adult-themed games from its platform.
Not because of a direct government law, though.
No. It happened after the payment processors, specifically Visa and MasterCard, were pressured by activist groups. Collective Shout was mentioned in the sources.
So the pressure wasn't on Valve directly, but on the companies that let people pay Valve?
Exactly, and this reveals a profound power shift. Payment processors have effectively become the de facto new moral police.
How they justify it.
They use these subjective, often vague contract terms, things like reputational risk or brand safety. Based on those, they can cut off services to platforms and businesses they deem problematic.
And because Visa and MasterCard are global.
Their action is global. It effectively censors legal purchases worldwide simply by cutting off the payment infrastructure required to make the transaction. No payment, no access.
Experts in the sources see this aligning with a broader, historically familiar trend, right? Operation Choke Point 2.0?
Yes, that term comes up. It refers to pressuring financial institutions to cut off services to politically undesirable but often legal industries, whether it's gun dealers, crypto exchanges, or, in this case, adult content platforms.
And the creators themselves are sounding the alarm about this.
They are. Famed video game creator Yoko Taro warned that by controlling payment processors, you gain the power to, quote, even censor another country's free speech. That's a powerful claim.
It really is. This realization spurred significant grassroots efforts, apparently. A petition protesting this massive overreach gathered over 77,000 signatures.
Which is impressive, but the fundamental power dynamic, the chokehold the payment processors have, remains largely unchallenged legally or structurally.
Okay, so that's financial pressure. Simultaneously, we see the EU using its market size to exert global content control through regulation.
Right. This is what policy experts call the Brussels effect.
The key mechanism here is the EU's Digital Services Act, the DSA. Before our listeners' eyes glaze over at the acronyms, let's quickly define this. The DSA mandates the VLOPs.
Very large online platforms, defined as those with over 45 million monthly active users in the EU. Think the big social media companies, search engines.
Okay, those VLOPs must systematically mitigate systemic risks. What counts as a systemic risk?
Well, the definitions include things like disinformation and hate speech, which sound reasonable on the surface, but...
But the definitions can be broad and politically charged.
Exactly. And because these global platforms, for logistical and economic reasons, rarely run completely separate versions of their core service for different regions...
A U.S. congressional report from July 2025 claimed the DSA effectively forces these platforms to apply EU content moderation standards worldwide.
That's the core of the Brussels effect argument. A political statement that is entirely lawful, say, under the U.S. First Amendment, might now be classified as a systemic risk requiring removal globally just to satisfy regulators in Brussels.
And the real-world impact of this is apparently already being felt.
The sources suggest so. That same congressional report cited evidence from a private workshop where regulators allegedly classified a common political statement.
Which one?
The phrase, "we need to take back our country." allegedly classified as a form of illegal hate speech that platforms are required to censor under the DSA framework.
Wow, that's a very broad interpretation.
It raises serious free speech concerns, especially outside the EU. We also saw documented examples, according to the sources, of French police directing X, formerly Twitter, to remove satirical posts made by U.S. accounts, demonstrating that immediate extraterritorial reach.
This must create an immediate and massive challenge for multinational companies.
Huge. Navigating these conflicting global speech laws and compliance burdens is extremely difficult, especially when the criteria for illegal content are vague and subject to interpretation by different regulators in different EU countries.
Companies must need constant, up-to-the-minute analysis.
Absolutely. They need access to detailed policy analysis to manage this massive liability risk. This is exactly the kind of complex, cross-jurisdictional information that resources like the Compliance Hub Wiki aim to provide, because the penalties are severe.
How severe?
Fines can be up to 6% of their global annual revenue under the DSA. That's potentially billions for the big players. So companies are constantly playing defense against vague rules and the threat of ruinous fines.
And meanwhile, the U.S. is generating its own potentially problematic legislation, often disguised as safety measures.
Right, creating a confusing domestic landscape on top of the international pressures. The Kids Online Safety Act, or KOSA,
Despite its appealing name,
is heavily criticized in some sources for establishing these vague duty of care systems.
what does that mean in practice?
It essentially incentivizes platforms to aggressively over-censor any lawful speech that could remotely be linked to a harmful outcome. Think content related to LGBTQ plus support, suicide prevention discussions, mental health resources. Platforms might remove it purely to avoid potential liability, even if the content itself is valuable or protected speech.
Chilling effect by design, almost.
That's the argument. Similarly, the proposed Stop Hate Act suggests massive daily fines, $5 million per day, for platforms failing to combat foreign terrorist organization content.
Again, sounds reasonable on the surface.
But critics warn the measure effectively deputizes certain advocacy groups and fundamentally threatens political speech. It coerces platforms to become agents of state censorship simply to avoid financial ruin.
So, in both KSA and Stop Hate, the goal isn't necessarily direct censorship via law, but creating impossible liability standards.
Exactly. Forcing platforms to over-censor as a default risk mitigation strategy. It's indirect control through liability. So this confluence of forces identity checks, encryption battles, outsourced content moderation, liability traps, it leads us to our final observation from the sources.
Which is?
The global regulatory landscape is now deeply fragmented. You have these hyper-specific, often ideology-driven content laws running parallel to extremely technical data privacy and identity laws.
And the result is chaos for businesses.
Pretty much. A chaotic and unpredictable compliance and enforcement risk environment for any business operating internationally or even just across different U.S. states.
We see clear regulatory divergence between, say, the EU and the U.S.
Definitely. The EU tends to implement these binding, comprehensive frameworks. They try to solve big structural problems universally, applying the same rules across the bloc.
Like the EU AI Act.
Exactly. Classifying AI systems by risk level, imposing requirements accordingly, or the EU Data Act, mandating data sharing rights for users of connected products, smartwatches, smart homes, industrial machinery.
And the crucial part is these EU frameworks apply extraterritorially.
Yes. Any U.S. business with even one EU customer, even with no physical office in Europe, must comply with these complex EU regulations.
Meanwhile, the U.S. federal approach, especially with recent moves towards deregulation,
Leaves a massive void. So the individual states are leading the charge, creating this patchwork quilt of localized laws.
we're seeing intense litigation, particularly in California.
California is definitely leading the charge. Aggressive lawsuits under legacy privacy statutes like the California Invasion of Privacy Act, CIPA, being used against modern technologies like tracking pixels and browser fingerprinting.
And new state laws are popping up, too.
Yes. Colorado's AI Act, for instance, imposes reasonable care duties on deployers of high-risk AI. That's set to take effect in 2026. It means companies need completely different compliance strategies state by state within the U.S.
And these rules aren't just abstract threats on paper. The enforcement actions are real, and the penalties are significant.
Very real. California's CPPA, the California Privacy Protection Agency, is actively enforcing privacy rights and handing out fines.
American Honda Motor Co. got hit.
They did. fined $632,500 for specific compliance failures.
What did they do wrong, specifically?
The fine was partly for using dark pattern cookie banner. That's a design choice intended to mislead users or make opting out harder than opting in.
Ah, making it easy to click accept all, but hard to find reject.
Exactly. They were also fined for failing to apply Global Privacy Control Signals GPC to users who were logged into their accounts.
GPC. That's the browser signal meant to universally communicate a user's choice to opt out of tracking.
That's the one. Businesses operating in California are now required to recognize and honor it. This shows just how granular the enforcement is becoming. It's not just about having a policy, it's about implementing it correctly down to the technical details.
And that was an even bigger settlement.
Yes, the California Attorney General secured the largest CCPA settlement to date against Healthline Media, $1.55 million.
What was that for?
For sharing health-inferred data that suggested users' health conditions beyond what consumers reasonably expected when they visited the site.
So again, enforcing user expectations and data minimization. These enforcement actions really underscore the rising financial and reputational damage of non-compliance.
Absolutely. The massive financial and legal fallout from these failures is precisely why resources that track compromised systems, like www.breached.company, are becoming so essential for businesses.
Because the cost of a data failure isn't just a minor PR issue anymore.
Not at all. It's moving towards potentially catastrophic financial liability, especially as fines escalate and regulators worldwide become more aggressive.
So we've arrived at this point of, what did the sources call it? Digital control convergence.
Yes. All these different threats we've discussed are stacking up simultaneously, reinforcing each other.
You've got mandatory digital ID systems making anonymity nearly impossible.
Combining with sweeping content censorship laws restricting expression.
And financial surveillance mechanisms like the payment processor chokeholds, the VPN blocking attempts, and the global development of central bank digital currencies, CBDCs.
Right, which over 87 countries are already exploring. These could potentially track every single transaction.
Yeah.
Organizations need that up-to-the-minute analysis on how all these interconnected risks impact them.
And resources like www.myprivacy.blog often document these converging privacy threats and risks.
Exactly, because the human consequences of this convergence are felt immediately, even for seemingly vague offenses.
Look at the UK's Online Safety Act. It seems to have created an ecosystem where police made a staggering number of arrests under communications laws.
Staggering is the right word. 12,183 arrests in 2023 alone.
That's about 33 arrests per day.
Yes, and many of these arrests, according to the reports, were for vague offenses like causing annoyance or inconvenience online.
What does annoyance even mean in a legal sense online?
That's the problem. Is it commenting critically on a local council post? Sending a sarcastic message in a gaming chat? Using harsh political language? The ambiguity is enormous.
And even if most of these cases don't lead to an actual conviction.
The arrest itself is the punishment for many. It creates a record, causes stress, costs money, and the entire digital environment is being geared toward mandatory identification and tracking of the source of that supposed offense, however minor or subjective it might be. #outro.
Okay, so to summarize this deep dive, we have tracked this massive, global, four-continent project.
Yeah, project might be the right word, even if it's not always centrally coordinated.
Whether it's Australia setting an absolute social media age ban for teens, Texas demanding ID verification just to download a simple weather app, the UK mandating age checks for nearly all online media, or the EU fighting to scan your private encrypted messages.
The overall trend is undeniably clear. The architecture for total identification and monitoring is being built, piece by piece.
And it is being built globally, almost always justified by that politically unassailable defense of child safety.
Which makes it very difficult to argue against, even when the proposed solutions have these huge, potentially negative side effects on privacy and free expression for everyone.
And this isn't just abstract policy theory, is it? This affects everyone listening.
Absolutely. These rules are actively shaping your daily digital life right now, or they soon will be. They determine whether you can download an app anonymously. They influence what political content you might be allowed to see globally, thanks to things like the Brussels effect.
And they determine whether the sensitive biometric and identity data you submit for age verification actually remains secure.
Which, given the track record of massive breaches we discussed, is a very open question. For professionals, for businesses trying to navigate this incredibly complex, multi-jurisdictional reality.
Maintaining constant awareness of legislative changes isn't just good practice, it's paramount for survival.
It really is. And resources such as the Compliance Hub Wiki become vital tools just for keeping track of all these moving targets across different countries and sectors.
The stakes here feel incredibly high. We've seen major platforms like Signal and Telegram threaten to leave the massive EU market entirely rather than compromise their core encryption principles.
A huge economic gamble, but a principled stand.
And we've seen Wikipedia challenge the UK's Online Safety Act, threatening to block UK access entirely, rather than comply with categorization rules they feel would fundamentally destroy their collaborative model.
These are not small players making idle threats. This shows the depth of the conflict between the platform's operating principles and the state's demands.
So the biggest question facing us, as these identification and censorship demands escalate globally, seems to be this. When the state demands control over the fundamental infrastructure of the internet,
Your identity, your private communication, your financial transactions.
will the world's most important platforms and infrastructure providers ultimately decide to compromise their principles and comply? Will they build that universally surveilled internet?
Or will they simply choose to unplug, to withdraw from markets, to refuse to carry certain traffic, letting the censored or restricted internet become the new status quo?
Fracturing the global digital landscape we've known for decades. It's really a choice, isn't it, between a potential future of total identification or a return to a more fragmented, possibly less convenient, maybe less secure in some ways, but perhaps ultimately more free internet.
That seems to be the crossroads we're approaching.
Definitely something massive to mull over until our next deep dive.